So we're moving now into part two of our talk today, which is breaking through these obstacles. So we've identified kind of the more common obstacles. Now we're talking about breaking through those obstacles. So I'm going to ask you again, what scares you about the act or process of writing? What gets in your way? What stands between you and your chair and your desk? Maybe when we think about doubt, it's the blank page. Maybe that's what stands in our way. You think, what will I say? I doubt that I have anything to say. Or what makes what I have to say worthwhile? So the response to that, if this is something you wrestle with, remember that you learn by doing. And it's totally normal to set out not knowing what you will say. Okay, so we have responses to these fears. Maybe you doubt you really know enough about this. Do I really know enough to write about this or that topic? Or who am I to write about this? In the beginning, no writer knows enough. So if you doubt that you know enough about this or that you don't have anything important to say, know that everyone has to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. That's actually one of the primary purposes of writing. We write to discover. We write to expand our knowledge. We write to expand our view of the world. We write to develop a deeper understanding. You have to start somewhere. I'm going to share another quote with you here by Henry Louis Gates Jr., who shares this advice. He says, "Be prepared for the revelation of things you don't even dream are going to come up. Don't sit around and wait until you have the story. Just start telling the story." I love that quote because it is so encouraging to writers who are encountering fear and doubt in all aspects of this creative endeavor, right? I also want to suggest something to you that sounds entirely counterintuitive. As writers, it's important that we all have a little bit of naivete, because without that, we won't be as curious. A while back, years ago, I wrote a piece for a newsletter called Writers Weekly. And I talked about this, about uh, a little bit about being naive as writers. I wrote that I have learned to lean on my own naivete, realizing that every writer has to have a bit of it to ever succeed. So rather than shrinking away from an idea out of fear or lack of belief in myself, I want to pursue an idea wholeheartedly and sometimes even spontaneously, knowing that the worst that can happen is I receive a no response or no response at all. So ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen? When those fears crop up and they seem to be preventing you from sitting in that magic chair, the button chair, right? Ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen, right? Maybe the worst that can happen for you is failure. You have a fear of failing, fear of failure. So when I ask, what's the worst that can happen? Who immediately thought of that word? The F word, right? The F word in writing, failure. The worst that can happen is that I'll fail. Let's linger here for a moment because failure is one of the biggest fears known to man. I don't care if you're a writer or if you're a plumber. We fear failure. It doesn't matter your industry or your gender or the stage of life you're in. Humans in general fear failure. But if we dig into that, here's another question we have to think about. What does failure look like? What does failure look like? Author Robert Schuller famously asked, "What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?" Too often, I think we imagine failure, right, air quotes there, as this concrete rock bottom. something so final and so permanent that there is no recovering. There is no turning back. It's done, right? Failure exists as this hazy construct in our minds, something we don't even want to go near because it means doom, it means the end, it means no hope, right? But I want to get back to that question again. What is the worst that can happen? Maybe no one cares about what you wrote. Maybe no one reads what you wrote. Maybe you put in a whole lot of effort for a whole lot of nothing. Do all those sound like failure to you? Even if one of your worst fears comes true, is really the end, the be all, end of the road for you. If you fail, is that the end, right? So even when we fear failure, it's important that we get clear on what failure means, what that looks like for us. The painter Claude Monet once said, "The discipline of art requires constant experimentation, wherein errors are harbingers of original ideas because they introduce new directions for expression. The mistake is outside the intended course of action, and it may present something that we never saw before, something unexpected and contradictory, something that may be put to use. Let me remind you of the greatest chance of failure. Here it is. You fail 100% of the time if you never start. And you fail if you never take a risk." How many of you resonate with that fear of losing control? You have an idea you want to write about, but what if you start writing and you can't contain or keep up with your thoughts? Or maybe you think you can't get too wrapped up in a story or a creative project because you have too much else on your plate that is demanding your mental energy. Here's what I can say about that. Writing is so largely an act of trust. And what I mean by that is you have to trust the creative process, even if you don't know where it's leading. So when I was talking about that creative muse and her coming in and wanting to take the reins and saying, are you going to let that happen, or are you going to wrestle them back and say, I am in control? What I want you to do, this is the act of trust, is let that muse take the reins. See where it goes. Don't be afraid of losing control for a little bit to see where that creative process leads. I've learned that writing is an act of trust, and to trust something, even when you don't know where it might lead, is scary. At times, it's terrifying. On many occasions, I have set out to write something to, for example, relive an experience that is so neatly packaged in my mind. But when I start to let the words out, the whole idea unravels and it becomes unruly, right? In some ways, the writing process is about learning to let go of control and let the words and ideas direct themselves. So if you've experienced this, or you find yourself experiencing this at some point and going, oh no, this is not the way that I meant for it to go, know that the creative process, that creative muse kind of taking over and taking your writing in unpredicted places, that is totally normal. And not only is it normal, it's actually a really exciting part of the process if you let it. It can be uncomfortable, to be sure. You can get lost. You can go down a rabbit hole and, you know, 20 minutes or 2 hours later go, how the heck did I get here? Right? But if you want to find that real gold, you have to mine for it. And mining, if you think about the mining process in a literal sense, it's very messy and it's very deep, right? So you have to wander through that, and it can get messy. In fact, it should get messy. Messy is okay. In their book, Art and Fear, Bales and Orland write, simply put, making art is chancy. It doesn't mix well with predictability. Uncertainty is the essential, inevitable and all-pervasive companion to your desire to make art. And tolerance for uncertainty is the prerequisite to succeeding. So think about that for a moment. Losing control or allowing the muse to guide you rather than the other way around is actually a critical part of the creative process. So the other common fear that arises, of course, is risk, which we talked about. And maybe the fear shows up to you in this form, in the form of risk. Are you afraid to take risks? Are you afraid that you'll make a mistake? Are you afraid of uncovering something you might not want to uncover? Are you afraid of making yourself vulnerable? There's a big word, right? Whenever we sit down to write, we are, in fact, agreeing with ourselves that we will take risks. I never thought of myself as a risk taker. Always been careful, wanting to stay in complete control of all aspects of my life. But here's something to chew on. Control and creativity don't work very well together. So if you are afraid of messing up, right? Think on this. To live a creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong. To live a creative life, Joseph Clinton Pierce says, we must lose our fear of being wrong. Too often, I think that writers become blinded by the potential obstacles and don't follow the thread to the other side of that obstacle. That is asking themselves, so what? Or what's the worst that can happen? Take the fear of making mistakes, for example. What types of mistakes are you afraid of making? Factual mistakes? The general fear of being misunderstood? Or someone calling you out and saying, that's not how it happened? Sit with your fears and probe them. See what answers you can come up with. The more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. I'm going to say that one more time. The more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. So the greater the fear, the greater the resistance is going to be. Because if it means nothing to us, there's no resistance. Why? Because there's nothing at stake. So thank you so much for listening today and for hopefully having some takeaways yourself in writing and fear and how to break through our obstacles to find our voice. I hope to see you on another Writing Craft Talk soon. Bye for now.